Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on Twitter. Our call sign is @TTParliament.
Can start? Yes, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, members. Welcome to this, our 25th meeting of this Joint Select Committee on National Security. We are quorate and therefore can proceed. We have received contact from Mr. Prakash Ramada, who could not be with us today due to professional commitments. Let us move very quickly then to the confirmation of the minutes of our last, the 24th meeting, copies of which is now before you, members. The 25th meeting of our Joint Select Committee on National Security, and in particular this second public hearing pursuant to this committee's inquiry into the key issues and recommendations of the final report of the Police Manpower Audit Committee. Let me, as usual, indicate that these proceedings will be broadcast at a subsequent date on Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Let me welcome you again, members of the Police Manpower Audit Committee, and for the record, invite you to introduce yourselves.
Other members. Is it on? It's red. Let me. I am Professor Ramesh Devsaran, Chairman of the committee. On my right and left are other members of the Audit Committee, whom I will ask to introduce themselves, starting from the right.
I am Harold Phillip, Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police, Crime and Support.
On my left.
I'm Dr. Levis Guy, Obiako International Security Consultant, and I'm representing the Tobago House of Assembly.
I am Alan Miguel, Attorney at Law, member of the committee. Good afternoon, everyone. Paul Richards, member.
Good afternoon, Saddam Hussein, member.
Good afternoon, Robert LeHunt, member.
Good afternoon, Nicole Olivier, member.
And good afternoon, Nigel De Freitas, member.
Thank you very much. And you were with us sometime past last week, and you are with us again. The objectives of this inquiry is to consider the findings and recommendations of your final report, so-called final report of the Police Manpower Audit Committee, to hold consultations with relevant stakeholders on the recommendations of your committee in that report with a view to identifying an implementation roadmap. 3, to analyze, examine, and review the performance and activities of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and other agencies involved in national security with regard to the recommendations made by the Police Manpower Audit Committee. And 4thly, to report to Parliament on this matter from time to time. You will recall when you appeared on the last occasion, we traversed a number of issues. From these, we have identified a shorter list of key issues, and I will give 4 examples of them. 1, an assessment of the current state of the human resource management function within and for the benefit of the TTPS. 2, the recommendation of the Police Manpower Audit Committee that a pre-service training component be introduced as a recognized induction stream for the police service. The practice, as adopted in other parts, in particular the Miami-Dade County, USA, was noted. Thirdly, the main issues and challenges facing the TTPS. Fourthly, the prevailing circumstances as it relates to the TTPS that led to the manpower audit and that which made that audit critical. And finally, the reasons associated with the prevalence of the acting positions within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. These are some of the key issues that came out from the discussions we had. So today we continue this discussion, and we will begin by looking at the governance structure. Because your report, members of the committee, spoke at length to the question of governance. How is the police service governed? How is it managed? What are the elements of this governance platform? So we want to look at that because, as you would have heard and as you know, we want to, having looked at what you are recommending, make some recommendations to the Parliament in respect of the implementation of your recommendations. So we would like to begin by asking you, Professor, and your team to comment upon this business of the governance of the police service, the way the whole structure is organized and whether it is the best for a modern police organization or otherwise, based on your findings and recommendations. The floor is yours, Professor.
I would wish to initiate this response by identifying 3 components of the governance issue, after which the committee members would add anything else that they would wish. The structure involves a commissioner with an executive, 3 deputy commissioners primarily. To a large extent, the minister has some control over this group of persons in terms of permission for leave and so on. Beneath the deputy commissioner level, there are several ranks which I would invite Mr. Phillip to describe in more detail since he has been a member of the police service. But there are assistant commissioners, senior superintendents, and so on. The governance issue as it relates to the commissioner and the deputy commissioners is quite different from the governance of the rest, as it were. The implications of that structure, especially governance of the commissioner of police and deputies, have been very challenging over the years in terms of apparent inefficiencies, complaints by the public, more precisely in terms of having a commissioner acting for several years. So in addition to the structure, there are process issues and qualitative issues which will arise perhaps as we get to the end of this particular discussion. But to add to the structure and the process of governance within the service, it will be very helpful if I invite Mr. Philip to add to what I have just said. Philip?
Thank you.
Thanks. From the rank of after Assistant Commissioner, we have Senior Superintendent, we have Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent, Inspector, Sergeant, Corporal, and Constable. The Commissioner of Police, in relation to the law, has complete, while he has complete management of the entire police service, he is responsible for the discipline and promotion of officers from the rank of Constable to Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you very much. So, insofar as the governance of the police service is concerned, it is correct to say that the Commissioner of Police is accountable both to the Police Service Commission and to the Minister of National Security, who, speaking on behalf of the Cabinet, dispenses government's national security policy through to the police service. And he, the Commissioner, is supported by an executive. Am I correct? Is there a problem? And he, the Commissioner, is supported by an executive. Mr. Philip, could you tell us, this executive, what does it comprise of, what precisely, so we can understand? Who are these persons? Well, not in terms of individuals or identification, but posts.
The executive comprise the Commissioner of Police, the 3 Deputy Commissioners, the 12, or I think 11 Assistant Commissioners, as well as we do have some civilian staff. These civilian staff account for the head administration, the head research and planning. We have the head in information technology unit. We also have the director human resource, as well as we have the head corporate communication, the head internal audit, as well as we also have the head of the executive secretariat.
Right. In your recommendations, and before I give way to my colleagues to elucidate on this, in your recommendations, Professor, you suggested, you recommended that the country considers for the police service an oversight body. I understand, well, before I tell you what I understand, tell us a little bit about that thought about the need for this oversight body. What is it? What shape it is to take? What would be its functions in relation to the police service? Yes, members, whenever you are going to speak, just try to remember, a little better than I do, to touch that little button in front of there so that the little red light would come on for proper recording. Thank you. Proceed, Professor.
Thank you very much. Especially with respect to the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioners. To us, it is remarkable in the first instance that such appointments could become so troublesome and so controversial over the years. And a large part of it is based when you listen to the Chamber of Commerce, the DPP, we interviewed about 15 senior officials, including the commissioner and deputies. We interviewed past ministers of national security, previous commissioners of police, about a dozen of them. So when we reflect, we recognize that it is not only the inefficiency of the existing structure, the Police Service Commission in particular, but there is a large amount of mistrust of politicians generally. We find that quite an irony in a democratic country where people elect such persons and then possess such deep mistrust and fears over these elected officials. It seems to us, Mr. Chairman, that arising from these fears and mistrust, you create institutions, in particular, the Police Service Commission, which is relatively insulated and immune, relatively speaking, from civilian input or even from parliamentary input. The Constitution creates such relative immunity by calling the Commission independent. But it seems to us if we have to put not only a new structure, there has to be a refreshed line of thinking, starting from the early years, from 1956, and especially from 1962, as to what political independence means and what the role of the civilian population, the people who are most directly affected by crime and violence and other sort of serious crimes. What is their role in the government of the country, primarily with respect to institutions that should look after their safety? I'd like to continue for a few minutes more before we pick up. Would you mind if I add some?
I don't mind, but I want to... Just to look in particular, we would like the benefit of your thoughts on your recommendation as to this oversight body that you were contemplating. As it now stands, the governance structure is that the Police Service Commission, as a constitutionally enshrined unit, it hires the commissioner and the deputy commissioners of police. It is responsible for overseeing what they do and monitoring and evaluating what they do. It is responsible for promotion, appointment and promotion to those ranks, so to speak. The commissioner, we are told, has established an executive which consists of his 3 deputies, about 11 or 12 assistant commissioners, and a number of civilian personnel who head, for example, internal audit, corporate communications, director of HR, administration, information technology platform, and they all consist of this executive which assists the Commissioner of Police in his management of the organization. Of course, we know as well that the Minister of National Security, representing the cabinet, directs to the police service through the commissioner government's policy on national security so that the police service will operate with observation of and within the confines of that policy. You recommended that we might consider, in terms of rearranging new thinking for the management, the establishment, the implementation of an oversight body which will have certain responsibilities. That's my area of focus for the time being, so you're free to continue.
With due respect, Chairman, I cannot describe the options that we propose without explaining the rationale.
Of course, of course.
And that is what I'm getting into.
I appreciate that.
Very respectfully again, we have established institutions without explaining properly, especially to the public, the rationale for having these institutions as they are, So when they collapse, the search for a solution becomes very distant because there has been a misunderstanding or ignorance as to why they were put there in the first place. So if you'll allow me, I'll be very grateful, and my committee will be very grateful, because there have been criticisms superficial as to what we have recommended in the public by people not understanding what the rationale is, either with respect to the existing institution or with respect to the ones that we propose. So we don't want to remain exposed to such unfair criticisms without having the opportunity, as we believe this hearing gives us the opportunity on the record, to just spend a few minutes to explain the rationale. With due respect, Mr. Chairman, I know what you would like us to do, but we will come to that. But please give us the opportunity to explain the premise of the three options that we have given, starting with the first one. I was explaining that in order to accommodate public fear of political interference, the Police Service Commission has been established. And we find that that rationale hasn't worked well. You have all these complaints arising from a solution of public fear of elected politicians. And as long as you have that fear, you would want to cling on to an institution that has appeared so inefficient, unresponsive, as is quite evident. Now, what we try to do is to establish, therefore, to just make some amendments, because we realize change, cultural change, transformation of such oversight bodies, you have to give some regard to what exists. Our first option is to make some amendments to the existing Police Service Commission, in particular, disconnect them from the Director of Personnel Administration, because all the staffing issues, all the resources required by the existing Police Service Commission have to depend exclusively on the DPA. One of our amendments is to disconnect that relationship. Another amendment to the present Police Service Commission is to make them full-time and increase the numbers from 5 to 7. So as the report would indicate, we would retain as one option the Police Service Commission. The second option is an amalgamated of two agencies. One is the Police Oversight Board, which will be responsible for appointment, monitoring, evaluating, discipline, and so on. But that board will be supported by a police inspectorate, which will be more on the operational plane. That is going out, inspection of vehicles, the attendance of officers at their various stations, looking at the performance on a close-up arrangement with the officers on the fields, performance, citizen response, and all those operational issues which the police service have to deliver. And the police inspectorate will report to the Police Oversight Board. The changes, however, in moving from the Police Service Commission with this second option is to have a board that is representative, much more than it was with the Police Service Commission. By being representative, Mr. Chairman and members, we mean that the government would have four persons selected on the board, one by the opposition, one by the Social and Welfare Association, one independent person, and there's another one to make it 7 in numbers. The president will choose one, which will be the chairperson. Now, we use the word representative because we feel, and that is why I crave your indulgence to explain, we feel that the population, the civilian population should have an increased say in the institutions that govern them, of course, within a manageable structure. Within a manageable structure. So this body, the Police Oversight Board, and the Police Inspectorate, working together, will produce, in this era of post-colonialism, a more representative body, and also increase efficiency by having an agency like the Police Inspectorate doing the field work required to supply the board with the data required for its decisions. And the rest of details occupy over 30 pages in volume 1 of the report, I believe from page 145 to pages 170 or so. We dare to break new ground, not only by looking at what other countries do with respect to hiring a commissioner and senior officers, especially a commissioner, and having increased accountability direct to the population. We don't have that direct accountability now, and of course it's no fault of anybody. It's neither the fault of the commissioner, neither the fault of the government, right now not the fault of the Police Service Commission, because the structure doesn't allow that. So we pose the question to our minds and see how can you create a system, even the public, in a manageable structure, of course, with proper oversight subsequently, of having the population elect a commissioner and creating the obligation for the commissioner to regularly account both to the people through town meetings and to Parliament, perhaps on a quarterly basis. We call that direct democracy. It sounds innovative and perhaps very surprising. But when you survey how it has worked in other countries, it does create the commissioner and the police service to have a greater obligation to responding to community concerns. It means, therefore, with this system, number 3, it become effective community policing. The community will not be in the shade as it is now by making all these appeals of police response, complaints of one kind or another. With that direct form of accountability, which really it should be in a democracy with increased civilian input, I think that perhaps holds the promise of a new but a more efficient police service with the governance structure subsequently lodged within the Police Oversight Board and as well the Police Inspectorate. We made a difference, if you'll allow me, sir. I don't want to offend your patience, but we really have to put this on the agenda, not only for ourselves, but for the public to debate and discuss, and if only take an inch forward in recognizing the fuller democracy that was promised to this population in 1962. We believe, and I don't want to be too intellectual about it, but believe that democracy is a work in progress, but it must make progress. We feel that these 3 options should set the public thinking, and in a sense, I thank you for taking the time to elaborate, because we have heard public comments where people, having not read the report, fly off on a handle with electing a commissioner. It wouldn't work because we know it is a matter of scrutiny. We recognize that. But democracy doesn't go by silence. The oxygen of democracy is public debate and innovation as a work in progress. Other countries have done that. Perhaps I will leave my elaboration for another forum. But that in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman and members, the information is detailed in the Volume 1 report. So we have given 3 options. And we hope I think Mr. Lee Hunt had kept making the point about leadership. Leadership. These options concern the executive and the commissioner. But we have a structure now beneath that, outlined in the Police Service Act, the standing orders, which require the leadership to do what is written there. And as we have expounded in Volume 1 especially, those duties have not been properly fulfilled. That is why he kept telling us that with all these issues here amount to some extent, and with a learned mind and experienced mind as he has shown us last occasion, there is also the leadership issue, which means appointing a new commissioner in any way and anyhow will not necessarily solve the problems plaguing the police service. You need leadership. And I think at that point, I will stop, sir. Thank you for allowing me these few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon once again, committee, and may I take the opportunity to thank you all for making yourselves available once again, just 1 week after, and it really shows your commitment to the transformation that you've started with this document, or these documents, so thank you so much for that. Just for clarity, Professor and anyone else in your committee, and without casting aspersions to any members of the Police Service Commission, present or past, is it that you're saying that the present structure and remit of the Police Service Commission is not facilitating the level of effectiveness, accountability, and, to me, most importantly, credibility in the population as it sits?
Yes. That is our view. Sorry.
One of the opportunities that the last week's conversation gave me to do some research, and I'm tending to agree with you because I was able to look at a couple articles from the Yale School of Management and also the Harvard Faculty of Criminology, and a particular article called Crime Control by Senior and Middle Management Reform out of 2008 seemed to point very much in the same direction, that the management structure and this referred to the New York City Police Department specifically, and the issues that plagued it pre-1990s and its ability to transform itself really focused on leadership and management structure change at the middle management level and the senior management level. Given that the suggestion of the inspectorate was, and I'm presuming primarily focused on the commission and its 3 deputies, is it also going to have remit over the middle and junior ranks of the police service in terms of accountability, effectiveness, and something we spoke about in quite a lot of detail last week is the issue of the HR function of assessments, performance management and assessment and promotions that seem to be one of the challenges in terms of the police service.
On the leadership issue and the role of the oversight body, and with respect to the Police Oversight Board or the Police Inspectorate, we allow the commissioner to have some authority over staff below assistant commissioner. And the Oversight Board, because of previous experience of leadership and so on, and this might be changed eventually where experience says otherwise, but we need some firmer control both at the senior level, and we would leave that to the Police Oversight Board, with, of course, reservations for the Minister of National Security in some sense. But the commissioner would have jurisdiction beneath Assistant Commissioner of Police, because we don't want to strip the commissioner of all powers and then hold him responsible and accountable. Under the question of leadership again, and the deficiencies that have been noted both in the report and by members of this Joint Select Committee, the leadership has been allowed to lapse because of the inefficiency and the lack of reach and capability by the Police Service Commission. If the Police Service Commission were better disposed, both in terms of authority at the present time, they could have intervened and disciplined those who were not fulfilling their constitutional or regulatory functions. But the Police Service Commission remained, in our view, I was also chairman of the Police Service Commission, and I know the lack of capacity, reach, and so on. So I'm speaking.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is part of the shortcoming of the PSC as presently constituted? Because I've heard this conversation in the public domain in several different quarters. Its ability to properly assess the performance of the commission and 3 deputies, because there have been suggestions that, well, the Police Service Commission constantly gives the police leadership passing grades, while the police service gets failing grades. And there seems to be that disconnect. And it's part of the constraint of the Police Service Commission as presently constituted, especially in terms of its assessment protocols for the performance of the police commissioner and his 3 deputies, part of the shortcomings that you're talking about, or is it, as it's presently constituted, able to do a better job of the assessment of the police commissioner and his deputies?
Well, your last sentence to me is accurate. They are not able to do a better job given the present structure. And just to give you one example, with due respect, Mr. Richards, the dependency on the Director of Personnel Administration means that the Police Service Commission cannot get up one morning and advertise. It has to get the resources to advertise through the DPA, and it goes to NIPDEC, and so on and so on and so on. I put in a request when I was chairman, 2 years old, and that request remained for advertising for a permanent commissioner. It remained on hold for 2 years because there was such meandering about getting funding, and 1 minute NIPDEC didn't know what to do, or next minute the DPA didn't know what to do. So yes, the present structure and circumstances don't allow the Police Service Commission to do what really supposed to do. Secondly, no, let me finish, please.
Including properly assess the commissioner's deputies.
I've commented that just now. Even though you properly assess these officers, you have to, if you want to understand the present situation, the present acting commissioner is the most senior. You couldn't put somebody to act as commissioner outside of the 3 deputies who are also acting and who are junior. So what is the Police Service Commission to do? It has to remain with the existing acting commissioner for several years. If it were a different structure, things could have been done differently. Yes, sir.
Where traditionally, and you headed it so you would know better than most of us, traditionally, from independence, the Police Service Commission's responsibility to the police service was to hire and fire and discipline all the officers of the police service. Basically, it was that. And the reason for that, as you indicated earlier, Professor, is that there was to be some insularity from the political directorate as it related to employment in the police organization and in the public service generally. The main organization, the administration, is headed by the Director of Public Administration, and they are responsible for public administration. The service commissions would have been established under the Constitution, and you have it populated by 5 or so men and women recommended by the president or whoever, and they have responsibility, the Police Service Commission, for dealing with the police service, prison service, Public Service Commission, and these. But these are all part-time occupations. They're not there full-time. And as you've said several times today, they, having made decisions in their meetings once a month or whenever they meet, they depend upon the General Director of Public Administration and his organization as a secretariat to implement those decisions. So it made perfectly for all kinds of inefficiencies, the likes of which you described a while ago. And that continued. It really was, to use a well-known phrase in the law, it became a cloistered virtue. Behind the scenes, nobody knows what's happening, stale and old, and working slowly, unoiled, to our detriment. That's the reality on the thing, some people perceive at any rate. And then in 2007, in an attempt to improve the management of the police service, there were constitutional amendments which reduced the power of the Police Service Commission from hiring and firing and disciplining all police officers. And it limited itself to two main functions: hiring and firing the commissioner and the deputies. And in relation to the other ranks of the police service, the hiring and firing was now transferred to the police commissioner. And if there were disciplinary matters inside of the police service, from assistant commissioner and down, and anyone appealed the outcome of a disciplinary process, you could now appeal to the Police Service Commission, so that the functions of the Police Service Commission were seriously truncated in 2007. But the paucity of the management and its inability to act swiftly and to respond to police needs in a very demanding and changing society remained what it was from 1962, basically. So that is what you're alluding to. Is that a correct assessment for the benefit of the public?
Quite so, Mr. Chairman, except you left out one of the major drivers for the constitutional amendments made in 2006 and 7. That is
the veto.
The veto.
Yes.
And that has had its consequences and its puzzle, as you would know.
Yes.
It is a veto remaining in disguise.
That is to say that the Prime Minister had a veto. When the Police Service Commission would have assessed and come to a conclusion as to who the commissioner should be, the Prime Minister remained with a veto to say, I am not having that particular person. Couldn't say who you will have, but could say we are not having that one, and they had to go again and again. In 2007, just to set the record straight, as the government of the day was seeking to improve the governance of the police service in the way I described, part of the negotiation with the then opposition included a demand from the opposition that the prime ministerial veto be removed in order to accommodate the passage of the constitutional amendments as I described them. And that veto went on that occasion. However, the management of the police service remained a problem. So now what we tried to do in 2007 was to fix the business of appointing a commissioner. So we ended up with a very elaborate structure which came right back to the Parliament. In other words, the Police Service Commission would hire a firm that had the capacity to do the advertisement and the assessment and the evaluation of the applicants for commissioner and for deputy. And then it would come up with a short list, and then it would come with a short list in priorities. It would then make that available to the Parliament, and the Parliament now, to democratize the procedure, will discuss this matter to see whether it accepts the recommendation of the Police Service Commission. All of that is fine, but that now did not. So whether you get the commissioner by election as a thought, and as happens many places in the world, and particularly in the United States, whether you get the police commissioner from the Police Service Commission as recommended, or the Parliament vetoes it, whatever happens, however you end up with the commissioner, you still have a police organization to manage. So you end up, so the issue of the police commissioner is just the appointment of the commissioner. That's one small part of the governance structure. However he or she is appointed is one thing, but we still have the issue of the governance of the police service, which, before I give way to my friends, remains that you have the Minister of National Security dispensing government's national security policy to the commissioner, which he adheres to. You have the commissioner and his executive carrying on the day-to-day planning and activities of the police service. You have the Police Complaints Authority, which has power to investigate complaints made by citizens, but quite apart from complaints, you still have the ordinary management and the functioning to deal with. And your recommendation of an inspectorate, not an inspector, but an inspectorate, meaning a body of, an institution that will be responsible, as you have described it, for monitoring the activity and so on, that's something to be considered. So you are saying, Professor, on the question of the new governance model, one of your suggestions, and I'm giving way now, is that we have a police, the POB, the Police Oversight Board, which will consist of a chairman appointed by the president. Am I correct? And you think it should go to about 7 members? Could you describe those positions again? Chairman appointed by the president. Go ahead.
3 from the government.
3 recommended by the government.
Yeah. 1 from the opposition.
1 from the opposition.
1 from Social and Welfare Association.
From the Police Social and Welfare.
Yes. That's 6. But 4, yeah. I'm sorry, yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Oliveira. Thank you.
Yes, Professor, go ahead.
And of course, the rationale is obvious. You have a government fairly and freely elected, and they must be allowed to govern with some minimal restraint.
Yes.
That's the composition.
Right. And did you mention earlier some independent?
By the
the chairman. Right. Okay, as appointed by the president.
See, for the benefit of members and the public, we are moving with those 3 options from a conservative institution to a more representative process.
Right.
1, 2, and 3.
And that police oversight body will now assume, what would their responsibility be? Tell us, please, Professor.
No, but we have it in the volume.
I know, but for the benefit of those who are...
Yeah, I don't want to leave out anything you see.
No.
So people have to refer for the greater detail.
Yes.
In sum, it will appoint, promote, discipline, transfer, but within a more representative constituted body. And the facility for so implementing these functions will be derived from the data-driven reports by the police inspectorate.
Right.
Now, other countries have police inspectorate.
Yes.
But we have not followed them slavishly. We want to fill a gap here with indigenous considerations and experience, and so we have reshaped what others have done to suit ourselves with regard to the police inspectorate. But just allow me 1 more minute, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly.
The veto has taken a bad name over the years. I come back to the question of distrust, but there's an extent to which distrust should guide your democratic system. You elect people to serve you, and we should make sure they serve us in that direction. Otherwise, the public has some role to play, and they must be allowed to play that role. So what we cannot leave undone is to leave distrust, especially with distrust of the veto. We have to remember Section 111. You would know it very well. The Prime Minister has to be consulted before the DPP is appointed, before the Registrar General is appointed, before the Chief Solicitor General is appointed. He has a veto over these appointments. So we have to ask the question, and we have to answer it. We have to answer it as a government, as a cabinet, and as a parliament. Why is there such concern over a veto of the police commissioner? When you have all these precedents, and when you have a fairly and freely elected government, and you have a National Security Council in which there are certain things that become known that cannot be publicly divulged, and so on, and so on, and so on. Thank you, sir.
Right, and let me give way then to Mr. Lee Hunt and then Senator De Freitas, as we examine this new governance structure as recommended by the committee.
Yes, Professor and the committee, I was glad to hear a little bit because I remember the progress of how we came to this position. If I could remember, go back, cast my mind back a little bit, although I was fairly young at that time, 2007. The whole concept that we were trying to move when we went then was the whole idea that you had, here it is, you had a police service commission that had all these powers. And the problem was you had this commissioner, and I remember even the word being used was a toothless bulldog. The fact that you were the commissioner in charge of something, and I had the ultimate rights, the ultimate power of someone that you have as a manager, as a general manager in charge, as a CEO, is to hire, fire, discipline. I mean, you have to have that power to get control, to be able to deal with the people. And therefore, I suppose rightly so, you had a situation whereby the role of the commission was changed to an extent and given the power to evaluate, as I said, the police commissioner. And you give the police commissioner certain rights and authorities to follow. And he had certain powers to deal with his troops, which in any management structure, any concept of management, that makes some sense. Now, again, I know we have a culture in Trinidad, or it happens not only in Trinidad, throughout the world, whereby when things doesn't work, rather than, I'm trying to get to the core of why this isn't working. It isn't working. We all agree. The end result is not working. And let's get to the core of why it's not working. And rather than trying to create systems to adjunct a system, rather than just dealing with what it is. And I keep going back to that, and I hope. So when I hear when what you were speaking about before, even when I look at some of the recommendations under the Police Oversight Board, we sort of want to go back now to somebody else having that power, to have that authority to do the correct disciplining and so forth, with some sort of assistance. But again, we're going to reach back. I could see us 3 years from now coming back with a police commissioner, because again, I like the first argument. If you are a police commissioner and I am responsible, the worst thing you want to do as being the CEO of a company is to tell me I have to work with people and somebody else has the rights and responsibility to discipline that person. So I mean, is the heart of the problem that, one, as was alluded to before, and I know I use the word leadership from the commissioner, that the commissioner, the system hasn't worked because the disciplinary work that was supposed to be done by the person who now has authority, for whatever reason, that person did not do it. And I think we need to get to the root of that. Why is that person not doing it? Is it because of systems? Is it because of culture? Is it because of process? Is it because of management? Because now the person has the authority, but yet still they didn't do. Before they didn't have the authority and they didn't do. And the second question, as was kind of raised there, and I want to, then why then we have a system where we have reduced the authority of the Police Service Commission. We say, listen, you have too much work. You can't see about disciplining this whole police force as a part-time job. You can't see about evaluating the whole police force. So your role is just to evaluate, discipline, deal with this police service commission, this commissioner and his deputies, 4 or 5 people. So is the problem really that we have that the Police Service Commission, how it's presently constituted, they just did not do their job in evaluating properly, or the mandate that they have in evaluation? So that's where we have to deal with. What is the evaluation process? What is the evaluation process between the Police Service Commission in evaluating the success or not success of a commissioner of police? Because you can't have a police system that is in such disarray, being supervised by a commissioner of police, and then you have somebody responsible for evaluating that person, and we kind of getting different reports. So isn't the crux of the problem, rather than changing wrong all these different systems, which I have no problem, change is always a nice thing, right? But isn't the crux of the problem that people who have mandates, they just need to do their job? So the Police Service Commission, nothing has to change. Only you do your job. And this is how you should be evaluating the Police Service Commissioner. This is the evaluation process. So we probably need to change that. And the Police Service Commission and the Commissioner of Police, right, who now have all this power and who has all this equipment and who has all these rules and regulations that are all there in your report. The systems are there, the rules are there, the equipment is there. There's somewhere in the report you talk about a fixed asset register that is being done manually, but there is an accounting system to deal with it. All these things are not being done. And therefore, it is really then the commissioner to do what he needs to do in all the resources that he has to make it happen. So I want the cluing into what it is. I looked at all the recommendations that you have, and I am not about creating additional recommendations or additional structures to fix a simple problem. And to me, the problem seems to be, so I'm putting in a 4th recommendation. I know it's not in your, but whereby we just simply need to get a proper evaluation process done by the Police Service Commission in its present form to do its job in supervising or in determining the success, the continued employment, whatever, of the Police Service Commissioner.
I understand Mr. Lee Hunt to be saying basically that the current arrangement is the issue really for him is one of productivity. Essentially, office holders have not been doing their job. Right, that's essentially what Mr. Lee Hunt was really saying. Now, we have a situation where the question is, who sets the targets? Who sets the standards? In one state entity now called WASA, you have a department that is known as the Water Resources Agency, but it is part of WASA. It is now clear that that agency has to be independent of WASA. WASA is responsible for farming, harnessing, purifying, and distributing water to customers who need it 24 hours a day. But the thing cannot assess and judge itself. The wisdom is that that Water Resource Agency ought to be an independent body, and it sets standards for WASA to comply with, standards of purification and distribution. In other words, 70% of the population should get water 24 hours a day based on your resources and so on. That Water Resources Agency would look at the entire system of water harvesting, water production, the standards, the distribution, the price, and it as an independent body sets these standards and then instructs WASA under law to comply with these standards. The present Police Service Commission, by way of analogy, it now has the responsibility for hiring and firing and disciplining only 2 office holders, the commissioner and the deputy commissioners of police. As for the police commissioner, he has the responsibility for hiring, firing, disciplining, transferring, managing the remainder of the police service, the bulk of them. And as well, but this toothless bulldog thing ain't finished yet, because, for example, as the commissioner, tries to deal with the issue, as we saw last week when you were here, with the issue of promotion, he is also in law accountable to the court by way of judicial review and other things. So as he tries to promote, some disaffected officer takes that matter concerning his promotion to the court. And then the court intervenes as it must. And it shuts down the entire promotion process, affecting 300 persons, until this matter is resolved. This matter may take a year and a half, 2 years to be resolved based on the... So the commissioner is in that sense not only accountable to the Police Service Commission and to the minister and to the Police Complaints Authority, but he's also accountable to the courts, particularly through the avenue of judicial review. So we have all kinds of problems working in here. So before Mr. Senator De Freitas comes in, the question is, who in your model will set the standards for the police who must produce the goods and say, you must meet the standard? A report comes in 5 minutes or in 2 minutes, a car or a response should be on the scene to the citizen who is under attack. Who will see? And is it that the inspectorate will monitor these set standards to see if it is working well? That I understand to be the model you're talking about, Mr. De Freitas. But the point, finally, made by Mr. Lee Hunt, in any model, in Trinidad and Tobago, one of our greatest afflictions is in fact the issue of productivity. So whatever model you have, if persons who hold office are not doing what they are expected and paid and sworn to do, then we'll have a problem across the board. And in that regard, I understand the point that Mr. Lee Hunt has forcefully made. Senator De Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to strongly agree with Mr. Lee Hunt, who would have just joined us recently on this Committee of National Security, there was a public hearing done, I think either this year or late last year, where we would have had the Commissioner of Police here. And one of the questions, because I remember I asked this, was dealing with the appraisal of the Commissioner of Police. And some of the things that came out, and I'm just using my memory here, was that the Commissioner of Police sets his own targets for himself, which the Police Service Commission would either disagree or agree with. And one of the reasons that I remember that is because I kept asking, well, how is this even possible? Is this international standard that you are sort of assessing yourself, to which the body that is supposed to assess you would then agree or disagree? And what we've been seeing as a citizenry and as a nation is that we know that the police service is not operating efficiently, but then the police commissioner continues to get good reports. So therefore, something is completely wrong with that. And what Mr. Lee Hunt is alluding to is that something has to be wrong with what you're assessing the police commissioner on. Something is wrong with the system as it's supposed to operate in terms of the feedback you get and then what you're asking the police commissioner to do. So therefore, what we need to figure out, just to put it more succinctly, is it a situation where the police commissioner is asked to operate a system that is not working and therefore cannot be blamed, or is it that the police commissioner, the system is working and the police commissioner is just not using the system properly? And then that's a simple issue of the assessment. Because ideally, once you put the responsibility under the police commissioner, all that is left for the Police Service Commission to do is to remove that police commissioner and put one that will use that system properly based on the assessment. And if that is the case, then you don't need to change anything, because all you're doing here by appointing a board is just changing the driver, if I'm to use that analogy. There's no wheels in the car. So it doesn't matter who you put. Could be a NASCAR driver, could be an average man. They can't drive the vehicle because the system is not working. But if the system is working, then you need a better driver. So this board will encounter the same problem in relation to money. They're not going to be able to do anything. Money is an issue. Money is an issue for the Police Service Commission. That's why you were alluding to when you were chairman and you wanted to put an advertisement out, there's just no money. So what is the board going to do? They're going to want to put an advertisement out and there's not going to be any money. So that's not going to solve that problem. But if it is with the money that you do have, you have a commissioner that could give you value for money in the system that he has, then your problems will fix in that regard because they have the responsibility to manage. And I highly suspect because Mr. LeHunt works in a private sector situation where they understand that the CEO is ultimately responsible. If the CEO walks into a building and realizes that, let's say the janitor, for example, is doing something wrong, he doesn't speak to the janitor. The janitor has a boss. And that is where the chain of command conversation the last time we met came into play. Is that chain of command working properly? Ideally, the Police Service Commission should be able to speak to the commissioner. Are you doing this properly? No, you are gone. You bring in somebody that does, because then that somebody now goes all the way down in disciplining every single police constable below them. So in that light, I'm asking the question, in your report, were you able to look at the appraisal criteria and targets for the police commissioner, compare it to international benchmarks to see if that is an issue?
Thank you. There are 4 aspects in the response, including a response to Mr. LeHunt. We understand very clearly all that has been said by Mr. Richards, Mr. LeHunt, and yourself, and especially by the chairman for his learned experience over the years with the rules governing the oversight issue. We have to remember that all the answers cannot be provided at this forum. For example, to each body, which one or which process is selected, there will have to be regulations, which are really the operational aspect of the substantive legislation. And that is a point to be reached once we clear up all these details. The second point, from my experience, and interviewing the commissioners, deputy commissioners, and with Mr. Phillips' helpful presence on the committee, it has to be recognized that the office of a commissioner in this country is a very demanding one. He has expressed this in several ways. It is not an ordinary private sector institution or a straight line institution. There are calls suddenly, there's politics in policing. There's the presence of Parliament, which sometimes provide extra burdens on the commissioner in his practice. For example, as he has said, he has been given to be accountable to the finances in the police service. Am I right? Yeah. And he tells us that is a very demanding exercise with serious implications in addition to his other duties. So what we are trying to do is to find a middle ground, not to solve the problems 100%, but to put us on a track which experience would help us discover a fuller solution. The other element you raised, and quite rightfully so, is the assessment procedures. The assessment begins with consultation between the commissioner and his executive, at least so it was, and the Police Service Commission in setting standards under some agreement. Before, as I remember, which I've always had a problem with, because they don't really get to the deep roots of criminality in the country, and accountability. But, as it were, it might still be so, because that was the agreed system. They say road safety is one measure, how many fatal accidents and so on. Financial management was another one at that time. Public confidence was another one. And the reduction of crime were 4. As I told you, I would have added more and I would have made some changes, but I left in a hurry, as you do. So the question is, well, how do you evaluate these 4 criteria? There was, Mr. Leot, an insufficiency of resources and expertise. The Police Service Commission members couldn't and can't do it. And the expertise available to the DPA was, without blaming anybody, maybe they couldn't find enough persons at the salary range, but certainly not enough. So we received these reports from the staff, headed by a director. And I don't want to personalize it too much, but the fact of the matter is their reporting by the researchers were not sufficient. But we had to make a decision. Take public confidence. The research we done here as a committee, public confidence is at a dismally low level. You see? So, but as you rightly said, and I appreciate your concern, how is it with all these gaps and deficiencies, the engine still moving? And I told you it was moving as an authoritarian structure without any assessment of quality output, which is what Mr. Leot is aiming after, Mr. Richard. So when you present a structure, though, the 2 are really oversight. The 3rd one is the process, which a lot of people get very excited about, electing a commissioner under some manageable constraints. Any option you choose with the regulations and removing the DPA, the regulations will have to respond to Mr. Lehunt and your concerns about how accountable do you hold him under what revised criteria. Because you shouldn't have a police commissioner over the years, more recently, with such a low level of public confidence, especially when the planning and strategic reports of the police service itself tells you that the key issue is public confidence. Because you're serving the public, the motive is to protect and serve. So there is other work to be done later on, depending on what we settle here. But I notice out of the agenda in the discussion is the question of representation. The police, who does the Police Service Commission represent in terms of the people? Is that an issue to look at? Or is it we will live so all the time and have the public grumbling, complaining, writing letters to the editor without any, even a moderate amount of input?
In their current dispensation, the role of the Police Service Commission is severely restricted. It has been whittled down substantially. And I do take the point, which is you're carrying, and I see value in it, great value as a matter of fact, that there ought to be some, in terms of this public service of policing, there ought to be some democratization of it. And in some countries, that manifests itself by the election of a commissioner by the local authority, the mayor's department, or just like a mayor and that sort of thing. In Trinidad and Tobago today, it comes to the parliament where 41 people will discuss the issue after the Police Service Commission does its very limited mandate to come up with a short list and that sort of thing. So the democratization point and the public involvement, great value I can see in that.
I want to invite my other members, but I must say, for example, because I belong to an international association of oversight bodies. We had a conference in Canada, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And I visited several cities. Toronto was one. When the Police Service Commission there is meeting and interviewing the commissioner, it is done in public. He has to answer, and the public sits in the gallery and listen. That is a movement towards democratizing the process.
Yes.
And it is not out of disrespecting the commissioner or trying to avoid political interference. I think the Prime Minister is right in making a distinction between political interference and political intervention. So you cannot have a 1% set of bodies up there and ignoring the 99% down below whose public safety is at great risk. We can't have a 1% conservative system existing since 1962. I think the time has come to consider, if not agree on, some kind of change. And I would invite my members, if you would allow me, for them to make any additional remarks.
I think that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is akin to an old colonial barge going down the stream in the wrong direction. The question is, how do we turn this around? We can talk about the structures of the police service, whether we use the Police Service Commission or whether we use a police management board. But what really and truly is required is for the police inspectorate to establish benchmarks, to establish targets, to establish outcomes, and have systems in place to ensure that these outcomes and they are met. The police service is very, very reactive to what's taking place in the environment, and the environment is changing rapidly. So whether it is that we reconvene or restructure the Police Service Commission or have a police management board supported by a police inspectorate, that will be a determination for us to sit and work out. But nevertheless, I think that the requirements or the desire of the public right now is to have a police service that is more responsive to the needs. We, over the past 10 years, and this is a way that people hardly calculate the murder rate, within the past 10 years, we're talking about over 4,000 young men and women destroyed in this country through violence and through the whole criminal enterprise. So the time is now, and this is what the committee is trying to impact this committee on. The time is now for us to get it right. We can as adults, adults in this room say, well, okay, let us restructure the Police Service Commission. However, the establishment of target benchmarks and so on and so on, I mean, that can be incorporated into it, or we can call it a police management board. But I think, yeah, well, the police, yes, oversight board. But I think the key to any structure like that is to take away some of the management burdens of the police service. So take, for example, issues like the mobility of the police service. That is a recurring thing. We can forecast that in the next 5 years, we are going to require 700 motor vehicles. We can perhaps say that the benchmark in terms of the amount of murders we need to solve is about, let's say, 23%. So these benchmarks are then established, yes? And with this management system, we can perhaps come to a joint select committee like this and put our findings forward. And perhaps Parliament could realize, could help in terms of distributing resources and so on to the police service to meet these benchmarks and to ensure that the management of the police service is such that it redounds to the benefit of the citizens of the country as opposed to the criminal element in the country. Yes, yes, you are.
The question is, right now, it is the police commissioner that sets standards for the police service. He's accountable to a diverse number of entities, the courts, police complaints authority, the constitution, the minister, and the police service commission. Diverse.
Yes.
But the question is, in this, so we have the police inspectorate that will independently assess the value, the quality of its work, the standards, and report accordingly. Who will set these standards? Right now, it is the police commissioner. He has to deal with Head 64, managing his budget, which we heard a while ago is in itself an onerous issue. He has to deal with the administration and the day-to-day management of the affairs of the police service. Files come to his desk store like this every day for signing, for this, for that, for the other. He has to deal with that. At the same time, he has to deal with the management of crime out there. He appoints a deputy to deal with crime, but he is responsible for managing the crime situation. So as it now stands, he is really a seriously burdened fellow. The question, therefore, is who will set the standards? Because right now, he is setting the standard. He decides on the basis of government policy, he decides on the strategy, the way forward, and is responsible for that. Are you saying that the Police Oversight Board will set the standards and the Commissioner of Police will be to implement those standards, and so the board sets the standards, the Oversight Board.
Indeed.
The Police Commissioner carries them out, and then the Police Inspectorate assesses to see how efficient and how they're meeting their targets and so on. Is that the model, Professor?
Yeah.
By and large?
By and large, yes.
Members. Yes, sorry, Mr. Phillip.
I would want to add that the Police Commissioner, in terms of setting standards and targets, obviously, if he is, according to the Constitution, has complete management of the police service, and we have to read what the Constitution says. He has the complete management, no other. That isn't written in any other piece of legislation for any other department. So obviously, it would be necessary and in its present configuration, he is responsible for setting the standards too, or at least one of the main persons.
Goals, the targets.
So what in fact has occurred in the police service over the last 6 years is that the police service would have developed a strategic plan, and he would have developed a strategic plan, and for each year, we develop operating plans. And in those operating plans, we have targets set. In so doing, to develop the strategic plan and so on, we do a broad consultation with stakeholders, both internal and external, including the Police Service Commission, including the Police Complaints Authority, and all members of the board. But what I'm saying is that in the end, we produce a document, which is the strategic plan, and for each year, operating plan, which, like any organization, we must set targets. What would happen there is that even if we have any other oversight body, which we are mindful to have, what would happen is that they too would be part of the setting of the targets, and there would be some agreement, because they can't set any targets by themselves just as an autonomous thing to come and impose. Because they don't have to deliver anything, but at the end of the day, almost like dictating, okay, well, we sit here and we sit on this side and dictate. There would be some kind of agreement. And with that common agreement, then we would be able, the commissioner and the TTPS would be given that kind of directive to at least achieve those particular targets that have, in fact, been agreed upon. And what is happening at the present time is that when we look at the role of the Police Service Commission, the Police Service Commission, within recent times, they have finalized, it's some work in progress, but they have finalized in terms of the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, a performance management system. And that was done earlier this year. The areas in looking at the very operating plan that we have produced and their own involvement, the 5 areas that they have identified and to which they evaluate the commissioner and the deputy commissioners: maintenance of law and order, human resource management, financial management, strategic management, and public trust and confidence. What is now happening with the Police Service Commission is that we, together with the commissioner and deputy commissioner, we are agreeing, we are now agreeing as to what targets between both the Police Service Commission and the commissioner and deputy commissioner, what are the targets that the Police Service Commission expect us as an organization to achieve. So we're moving into that direction of agreement. And out of that certainly would come the drilling down, the setting of targets for all the other, well, the commissioner would be able to, out of that off-spin, set the targets across the board for the lower ranks, you know, all to compensate and to contribute towards achieving the targets. This is what I'm saying, it is fairly new. What is happening too is that they have put in place a monitoring and evaluation committee at the secretariat, at the, yes, and we too, in-house, we have also appointed persons to do monitoring and evaluation, and we need to develop that capacity because we have now included that as part of our staffing arrangements. But what I'm saying is, certainly whatever powers or authority in fact given to any oversight body, certainly they would have to work together with whoever is in charge of the organization to have some agreement with setting whatever standards or whatever type.
In this regard, let me ask Mr. Phillip, and thank you for that elucidation. You mentioned a while ago that the Police Service Commission has worked out some standards and some targets under 5 headings. Is that correct?
Yes, they have recently.
And that would have been done in conjunction with the police service, the police commissioner.
And the deputies.
And the deputies. So you are simply saying that the Police Oversight Board can do the same thing working along with the police commissioner and his deputies.
Well, certainly, yes.
Right. And then the police inspectorate will do the monitoring that now a department in the service commission, in the police service commission does to see, because the end user of your service, your necessitous service, is the customer out there, the citizen. And it is the inspectorate looks out for him. He assesses, the inspectorate will be looking out for the citizen to see whether the standards are being met and kept in order that the people benefit from it, right? So I think basically we have a sense of what is required, and I've been able to conceptualize it in your model. I just want to say one thing before I open the floor again to my colleagues. The question I heard you mention, trust and confidence, and I just wondered for a second, what's the difference between public trust and public confidence, if they are different? Because I was thinking to myself, there are 2 aspects of this business of confidence with the public. One is on the integrity side, whether police officers are trustworthy and you can make a report to them and they wouldn't tell criminal John or Jean. So that's one aspect of the lack of confidence. And then there's another aspect of it, whether they feel confident that having reported the crime, the police have the capacity to investigate and find the criminal and prosecute the criminal. So to my mind, there are 2 aspects of the lack of confidence issue. One on the integrity side, are they trustworthy? Will they keep my secret? And secondly, their technical competence to solve the crime. If I am correct, is that what we mean by public trust and public confidence? If not, tell me what's the difference. Please, Professor.
No,
well, certainly it includes aspects of both, but public trust and confidence, what they in fact do is they go out to the public and conduct surveys to different stakeholder groupings, be it the community, internal surveys within the police service. They may go to interagency surveys, and all in an effort to, as well as, you say, they look into aspects of misconduct, matters that are being investigated.
Yeah, the PCA deals with
that. Yeah, well, both the PCA deals with it as well as the police service, because we also deal with the criminal aspects as well as the discipline. So it is included in those remit.
No, you want to say?
Yes, Chairman.
Chairman, my member wanted to say something.
Okay, I was just looking at, in terms of this whole process. And for me, I looked at a lot of vocabulary in terms of the relationship as we were discussing this aspect of it, in terms of the police and the public, the police internally. So you look at compliance with the law, okay? We look at cooperation, which is cooperation internally, which is among the officers themselves, and also we look at officers and how they relate to the public. Credibility of each officer. Distributive fairness. Is fairness in terms of when an officer approaches an individual, is it fair? Is it just? Procedural fairness in terms of the weight of the offense. For example, maybe some guy, probably let's look at it in terms of smoking a joint versus someone who has a stash of whatever illegal substance it is, how it's prosecuted, or whether or not the officer is going to say, for example, like this morning I had an incident where a young lady had a brake light, her brake light wasn't working, and the officer just pulled her over and I told her that the brake light wasn't working, and he indicated also that maybe if it were a traffic branch, they'd just give her a ticket. So those are some of the issues you look at. But we're looking at procedural justice, which is the most important, I would think, as it establishes and shapes the legitimacy of each officer as an extension of law and order and its direct influence on the police service. So that is one of the issues that I really had to deal with in terms of corruption and the interface of the police service, members of the police service with the public. Because if you, as an officer, you have no credibility, and that was one of the problems we experienced in Tobago, when individuals testified that they are looking at credibility of the police service for corruption. Because in Tobago, we have a lot of drugs coming in on the coast, and you have incidences where people are testifying to exchange of drugs for just simple things with Venezuelans. These are some of the issues that we are grappling with in Tobago along the north coast. So you're looking at it in terms of shaping legitimacy and trust. So, and also that redounds to empowerment of an officer and integrity. And therefore, I am looking at leadership, not only from the top levels, but leadership in terms of officers within each communities. That is one of the questions, and that is why my primary focus looking at all the aspects of policing is in terms of the recruitment. That is my major concern in terms of recruitment now. How are we going to recruit officers? Also, on another end, we were looking at leadership of the Commissioner of Police. Is there, because I'm looking at this in layman's terms, are there set standards? Because I have dealt with a lot of international standards organizations for international security. Is there a defined standard for police officers and more so the Commissioner of Police? Because I find it rather strange that you would have a commissioner or acting commissioners acting for a considerable length of time, and now you are asking him to apply for the job. I mean, I find it, and reading documents, I find it rather strange that you would go along for X amount of time, and then maybe you turn around and select somebody else. So therefore, there must be criteria that goes along, that from those criteria you could say, well, you didn't meet the cut. Because at this point now, you are saying maybe your leadership skills are poor. But how come my leadership skills were poor probably 6 or 7 years, and you still kept, having, renewing my contract or whatever it's supposed to be. So these are what I am looking at is definition, standards in terms of the police service. If we are going out to recruit, what are the basic standards? In terms of background checks, we are looking at individuals coming forward. Now we see on the papers yesterday, people with certain background checks that are now revealing that people have had other, have had other activities, and in the commission, people have testified to where you have individuals who they are now finding out that some of these individuals should not have been police officers in the first place.
Member Hussein, we saw recently, the matter is being investigated, but the television and the papers told us recently that a young woman was seen with what looks like a firearm. She's now a police officer, and it has created all kinds of things. So background checks are very critical and important. And right now, we are using polygraphing in some ways for entry into the police service and for some specialist sections. And polygraphing is not the best practice for assessing integrity today. There are more refined techniques, and we need to be getting to that. Member Hussein.
Thank you very much.
And thereafter, I think we have explored the question of the governance sufficiently well to understand what that aspect of your 3 recommendations was. The other ones we have already digested. So after Senator Hussein, unless there's something pressing else on the governance question, I want to move into the point raised by Dr. Obiako in terms of, very swiftly, because we explored it last day, recruitment and training, so that we could come out with your crisp thoughts on it, and then move on to the next issue, which will be, what do we do about the human resource platform? Mr. Hussein.
Thank you again, Chair. I just want to shift back the conversation really to the disciplinary procedure of the police service. Now, while reviewing the recommendations and the documents that were provided by your committee, I saw that there was a 25% increase in terms of the number of complaints received from the period 2014 to 2016. And then there's a fluctuation in terms of the investigation of these matters, because some years we saw, for example, in 2014, 71% of matters were investigated, as compared to 2016, where it was about 52%. Now, there's one specific matter that was elucidated here in the report, which was that the matter was called 55 times. And the officer was not served 41 times. The quorum was not available 30 times. The matter was fixed for trial twice, and it still has not been resolved to date. Now, this is a very serious concern, because if we are asking officers to, we're asking the public, to have confidence in the police service, yet this is the performance of the disciplinary arm of the police service. Now, this would lead officers now to commit whatever infractions, and they will know that they have no punishment meted out to them because of the lack of performance regarding the disciplinary arm. And I say this because this lies solely with the Commissioner of Police, because ultimately he is responsible for disciplining officers below the rank of assistant straight down to constable. So I'm asking, what can be done to deal with these matters swiftly so that it can serve as an efficient deterrent to those officers who may want to violate in future?
In terms of the disciplinary process, there are different types of offenses, classes of offenses. There are offenses which result in dismissal. They go before a 3-man tribunal. And then we have those that, for lesser sanctions, they go before a 1-man tribunal. The normal requirement would be obviously that if a disciplinary breach would have occurred. Yes. All right. So we have, discreditable conduct, 3-man tribunal, insubordination, 1-man tribunal, neglect of duty, somebody didn't do something, absent from duty, something like that. But what would happen is, obviously, if a breach has in fact been observed by an officer, what we have is that within each police division and within each police section, we have a disciplinary officer who is appointed at the rank of assistant superintendent. At the divisional level, for the one-man tribunal, we have appointment of tribunal officers at the rank of senior superintendent or superintendents. Right. With respect to the three-man tribunal, over the last few years, probably about the last 3 years, or could be a little more, we would have had one three-man tribunal. However, within the last 2 years, we would have had set up three persons tribunals. So what we have is these are dedicated persons who their only function is 8 hours a day. However, with the one-man tribunal, generally, where we have the divisional commander or the superintendent will certainly, they are engaged in the daily activities. However, they would set aside a day of the week, to deal with tribunal matters. So once a breach is in fact detected, certainly the officer would have to be brought to the officer's attention. So the matter, an investigator is appointed, certainly, and recommendations would be in fact be made. And once the disciplinary officer has agreed that some particular administrative breach has in fact occurred, certainly it will move forward with charges being laid. What is happening is that there are time periods. In the first instance, a 30 day. In the second instance, another 30 days. So the matter should be investigated within a 60-day period. Thereafter, the matter is now listed to be heard before the tribunal.
I have to answer the gentleman's question here. Yeah, he's asking about the non-appearance of police as witnesses and the consequences and it in court as well.
It's internal. My question was premised on the disciplinary procedure in the
police service.
Right, and I'm happy that you raised the issue of court also, because there's a lot of officers who would not appear for matters which would ultimately lead to the backlog in the criminal justice system. So if, Professor, you want to address on that issue, I would be grateful.
Well, I think Mr. Philip has answered the internal issue satisfactorily.
Well, certainly, I didn't specifically look at this matter, but like in any, system where we have these matters being held, there are a number of situations that do in fact come up, and the person who is controlling the tribunal obviously is the tribunal officer. And in particular with the three-man tribunal, what we have is that we do have legal officers, well, attorneys at law could sit in, and persons do have attorneys at law, and sometimes we find, like every other matter, we do sometimes have some situations.
So what you described a while ago was the ought, and what he described is the is. So there's a difference between them. Mr. Lehunt.
Because on page, that same, following up on.
We have to answer, Mr.
Sorry.
No, I was just following up on that same tribunal and that just clarifying what it is that you were saying. Because just in the body of the report, just reading here, you talked about on 30 of the 55 times of the hearing that were called, the tribunal didn't have a quorum.
The officer didn't come, the ASP.
The tribunal didn't have a quorum. And then you talked about that you had set up a tribunal, a permanent tribunal. Did I hear you correctly when you said that you set up a permanent tribunal?
Yes, we have set up, right now we have 2 dedicated tribunals.
So that is
function,
post
one
that,
in South and one in Portersville.
Okay, so that is post the report then, because the report didn't give that impression. The report spoke about the fact that there wasn't a quorum. One of the problems with the tribunal and why you had so much of outstanding problems was the fact that the tribunal wasn't sitting on a regular basis, and the tribunal didn't have a quorum, so that people, when they came to the meeting, which was again had its own problems, they didn't meet a quorum. So I'm saying there seemed to be a little bit, if that would have set up after the report was done.
Our evidence was collected up to May, I believe, this year. So I don't know if that new intrusion would have happened after that. Sorry.
No. In other words, it may very well be that the case that was described by Senator Hossain, because Mr. Philip is saying within the last 2 years or thereabout, they have put 2 3-man tribunals permanently in place, presumably to deal with the backlog of outstanding disciplinary matters. It may very well be, since we don't have more details, that that record might have taken place before that development of putting 2 permanent tribunals in place. But at any rate, Mr. Phillips did not tell us, but I presume, Mr. Phillip, that the rules of natural justice must as well apply. Otherwise, the tribunal would find itself subject to an application for judicial review or an appeal at the Police Service Commission, or possibly judicial review application in the open court. Am I correct?
Yes, certainly will the tribunal.
And in this context, notices have to be served, much like in open court. They have to give him in writing, give him time to be heard, a reply. Then they set up the tribunal. He has to be served to be told when to come. He has to be taken off of the duty that he's on that day to show up. There are a whole lot of things, friends and who don't want to punish their friend, and all of these things get in the way of the ought, as Mr. Phillips described. And you end up with the is, as that record horribly shows. So those are some of the realities. And then in those processes, am I correct, Mr. Phillip, officers are permitted to bring attorneys at law?
In the 3-man tribunal.
In the 3-man tribunal. And once lawyers get involved, you know what lawyers can do. Create problems where none existed. You are an attorney at law, right?
Yes. But, I had a tribunal before the Service Commission that lasted 2 years. So this isn't anything strange.
Right. And as a result of this...
that lasted more than 2 years. 2 years I had one.
Good. And I am to understand that as a result of this, is it correct, Mr. Deosaran, did your committee find, ladies and gentlemen, that as a result of that cumbersome process, sometimes it may be that senior ranks, corporals and sergeants and inspectors and so on, do not even bother to put junior officers or errant officers on disciplinary charges because they do not expect it will get heard promptly and the thing just goes out. Is that a correct position, Mr. Phillip?
Well, we do hear that at times. But you see, one must understand too that inherent in the disciplinary system within the police service from time immemorial is that this disciplinary system evolved from a punitive kind of arrangement and not an arrangement that is more developmental to the police officer. So inclusive in that system is a lot of adversity and adversarial behavior when the tribunal is taking place. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of sore, persons are uncomfortable at the end. But I mean, this is a system that is in place. But certainly, the whole disciplinary process within the police service needs to be reformed to include things like mediation and to ensure that, those minor type of matters could in fact be dealt with in a particular way, so that we use the disciplinary process too as a developmental kind of arrangement where we have progressive discipline and all these things.
Did your committee make recommendations for the improvement of the disciplinary process as described by Mr. Phillip in the police service? Just refresh my memory, please.
If I recall, as far as we reached, we pointed out the deficiencies, the procedural deficiencies, and the structural deficiencies, and asked that it be reviewed. That's as far as we went. We didn't put in any specific amendment and so on. Yeah. But we saw it serious enough to point out.
Related. It's related, but I was wanting to give way to Member Oliver, who has not been allowed a question so far. Go ahead. But it's kind of traversing two areas, which I know you wanted to go on to, Chairman. It follows some of the governance and moves to disciplinary, but it also, to me, includes the area I know you wanted to cover coming up, which has to do with, this is a manpower audit report. Manpower audit reports focus on numbers, strength, and the use of the manpower, the human resources, skill sets, etc. And as I indicated before, I was able to do some research, and to your commendation, a lot of what you have put in this report in terms of your identification of challenges are very similar to what we've been able to see in these documents for analysis of New York, Scotland Yard, and Chicago. The question really focuses on the human resource management aspect of it, and in further down, the strategic human resource management, the SRMH. And I'm very confused as to why we would continue to think that, or would be surprised by the challenges that we're having with the Trinidad and Tobago police force, given what your report has indicated. And I will just, for the benefit of the public, go through the area of concern regarding the human resource unit. And the unit operates in a highly centralized environment with all the senior managers and support staff located in the admin building. Because of this centralization, officers are unable to input information and data accurately on a timely basis. Goes to managing the resources, because in any organization, if you cannot manage your resources, assess their performance, and monitor this, inclusive of promotions, intervention for better performance, you are going to have the problems that we're seeing here. The committee also indicated, and I'm quoting from the document, the two dominant human resource management systems are VESIDEX and IHRIS. VESIDEX is mainly used by the uniformed personnel within the human resource unit, and IRIS, is it? Is utilized by the civilian staff of the said unit. However, they operate independently of each other, even though they are inputting the same data. Right? So we have a discrepancy there. Another part of your document indicated that many of the senior personnel in the human resource department are civilian human resource professionals. And there is an issue with the integration of uniformed police officers and civilian professionals. So I think I've identified about 6 problems already. And I don't know how a commissioner and or his deputies can keep track of performance if a critical unit like the human resource unit seems in this level of disarray. And maybe the committee can go into more details about this, because this has implications for the management of the resources. And if you cannot manage effectively who you have now, and you're calling for more, you want chaos, because you are showing that you are not effectively managing the resources you have now. And in the studies from the University of, Yale School of Management and Oxford Criminology Department, is that the overriding premise of these reports is that, like in Trinidad and Tobago, the officers are fairly well trained, are pretty well motivated in many instances, but are at the behest of poor management of them, poor management of the information being delivered to them, and poor information in terms of communication strategy of what is required of them. Add that to demoralized forces of poor assessments, poor promotion issues, and you see why we're in the conundrum we're in. Goes back to what Member Lehunt was saying. This is a leadership issue. If the leadership is not cognizant of the fact that one of, if not the most important aspect of managing any organization is effective human resource management and the applications of the systems, as Senator Lehunt has said, that exists. It's not a system not there, no. It is there. For some reason, it seems the leadership either doesn't want to, is incapable of, or doesn't see the importance of this critical aspect of the services operations. Professor.
We, as I remember, have described this issue of human resource management and record keeping as an area of darkness in the police service. You are quite right. It is one of the disaster areas in the police service for reasons you have, together Mr. Lehunt rightly pointed out. No, it is leadership. And in that context, rather than recalling all the details we have already mentioned as to what to do and so on, we had recommended as well, because this exercise, we imagine, is part of a rolling plan. We recommended that the report itself, and quite possibly the deliberations here, be conducted and examined in collaboration with the police commissioner, whoever he or she may be. Because it really boils down to a matter of leadership. And not only that, accountability. The question is asked, why has the Police Service Commission called for the kind of accountability required when so many things have been happening within the police service? And Mr. Lehunt has summarized all the things, there was a sample of them, and asked the question, why are these things allowed to be so? So that is what we are pointing out. If the report didn't come up in the way it did, a lot of these deficiencies, without being critical of any one person, would not have been so sufficiently revealed. So we have put some light in those areas of darkness so that the Cabinet, the Joint Select Committee, and the government and Parliament, I believe in all of this discussion, we forget that the role of Parliament is to ensure the peace, order, and good government of the country. And Parliament now must have the consensus to proceed in the ways that we have outlined. Commissioner presence, whichever oversight body there is, must intervene more precisely and expeditiously, and also account to the people. That has not been happening, Mr. Richards. And we want to see a new dawn now coming on all these matters that we have been examining. It cannot be left so. You have rightly pointed out the problem. We agree with you.
Just one quick question, and this is for Mr. Phillip. Given your experience, your vast experience in the police service, and your participation in this committee, to your knowledge, because you see, you could be a great police officer with a poor manager, and to your knowledge, have members of the police leadership, including the commissioner and his deputies, undergone training in management that can help them to better deliver their mandates? Because very often we think, well, I'm a good doctor, but I can manage a hospital. Or I'm a good police officer, but I can manage a service. And management is a science. And people can be trained to be better managers.
Well, what I want to tell you is that in terms of the management of the police service, and even in management, higher level, middle management, and so on, as well as at the civilian level, persons have been exposed to training in management, leadership, and several other disciplines. But certainly I am saying that we do have, in fact employed persons in positions of their speciality also to assist in fact, in assisting in ensuring that the organization transform itself.
Head of, you have a human resource department, yeah, and you have a director of human resource
HR, yes,
who reports to the commissioner,
yes,
and that sort of thing. Let me give Member Oliver.
And
sorry,
just one thing I needed to add,
yeah,
just to the list of persons who are included in the executive, I needed to include the head of finance.
Head of finance.
Yes, I heard when
so, yes, so
I needed to include.
Yes, so the position,
head of finance.
The police commissioner, a permanent secretary is the accounting officer in a ministry. The commissioner is the accounting officer in the police service.
Yes, yes.
And he has as well a director of finance.
A head of finance.
Head of finance who sits on the executive.
Yes.
I thank you. Member.
Thank you very much. I'd like to make a comment. We have identified that a lot of the problems we see with the functioning of the police service really deals with deficiencies in the operation of the Police Service Commission and deficiencies in the operation of, well, all the agencies under the Commissioner of Police himself. And I'm wondering if, well, I know that when we bring both those bodies before us, the Police Service Commission and the TTPS itself, yeah, I'm sure those two agencies will elaborate on the challenges that they face in being able to function properly. In terms of the Police Service Commission, I'm not sure, did your committee, go into details into some of the challenges that they face in being able to operate, in terms of whether they have the adequate competence and capacity within their secretariat, their supporting staff. And in terms of the Commissioner of Police himself, your committee did identify that there are multiple governing bodies that operate within the staff that falls within the TTPS. So for the permanent civilian staff, they are accountable to the Public Service Commission. So he has no control over who he has and who he doesn't have. In terms of the civilian contract staff, I believe the Commissioner of Police does have some role in appointing those. So with those multiple governing bodies, that must be a challenge for the Commissioner then in ensuring that he gets that type of performance. The Act gives the Police Commissioner direct control over management of the entire TTPS, but that just refers to the uniformed officers. So I'm just wondering how far your committee then would have gone into looking at the challenges that the Police Service Commission faces in doing their operations and some of the challenges that the Commissioner of Police himself would have in being able to function effectively, separate and apart from whether or not he is meeting the targets that are being set.
In this exercise, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Oliveri, it is sometimes required to be fair to the police service and the commissioner. The provision that Mr. Philip pointed out in terms of the powers of the police commissioner responsible for managing the physical, human, and financial resources, there is a phrase at the end of that provision in section 123, which says, with the resources available to him, which means that he depends on the resources made available to him. And that is the sting in that scorpion tail that we must note when we asking the commissioner to account. The other issue is a substantive one, which I'm happy to respond to you with. How far have we gone into the challenges facing the Police Service Commission? In October 2011, Mr. Chairman, when I had just assumed the chairmanship of the commission, I explained to the then Prime Minister what the challenges are in detail. And I took my commission members to see her and the other officials, National Security and Attorney General. It's important to know this, you see, because in a proper debate, sometimes history is the most informative opportunity. And a committee was set up called the Multi-Sectoral Review Committee on the Police Service Commission, with the Attorney General, the Minister of National Security, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Chairman of the Law Reform Commission, and about 4 or 5 other personnel, including Social and Welfare Association. And I was asked to chair that committee. We produced a report, a final report with recommendations to clear up all these challenges: staffing, research support, removing the role of the DPA, some of the things we still pursuing here. And that report was presented to the then cabinet in October 2013. And I remember asking the Prime Minister, well, what is happening to the report? Because I was aware of the shortages in the police complaints, in the Police Service Commission as chairman. And I understand it went to F&GP, Finance and General Purposes Committee. And my subsequent request, well, what's happening in terms of bringing it to Parliament as was promised, with all the recommendations to repair the Police Service Commission and in relation to some things in the police service too. So it never saw Parliament, and I think it stopped there in answer to your question. Some effort was made, very extensive effort, and it was a document which I think was laid in Parliament by the Attorney General at one instance.
Let us return, I take the point, let us return very promptly because we are approaching close of play. In your report, you looked extensively at this human rights issue as raised by my... Human resource, sorry. What did I say? Human resource issue as raised by my friend Senator Richards. Yes, indeed. You did allude to the fact, which I admired, that there were many previous studies and reports about the issues of the police service, and you just spoke about one that died in an F&GP committee, that did not see the light of day. One previous report you pointed out in your final report recommended that a human resource department be put in one of each of the 9 police divisions. You recall? Is that a firm recommendation on your part that they should have that? It should, in other words, be decentralized to that extent?
Our recommendation to do that followed a decision by Cabinet to decentralize the human resource system.
Which was never effected.
We confirm that that is a good recommendation.
So it's a good record. So it's something we can continue to look at. Yes. Members? All right. Professor Deosaran?
Question.
Indeed.
Again, and I would like it didn't come up in any one of your recommendations, but and I'm just following up from my colleague here. You know, we run airports, we run airlines, and airline doesn't have to be a pilot, chief executive officer. We do a number of different things. Did you all ever consider, in light of the big management skills that is required to run the police service, did you all ever considered, that we probably don't need a police officer per se to run the police service, and that it should really be, we should look outside the gamuts because of the large management skills that is required, that it doesn't necessarily need to have a police officer per se running the police service? Was that any consideration given to that at all?
I would ask Dr. Guy Obiako to start off, and then perhaps Mr. Miguel. I'm afraid to ask Mr. Philly because...
I would want to ask him. I would want to comment on that.
I would just make a comment. We did, because I like some sort of, because I have some radical ideas and some unconventional ideas in terms, which I wouldn't express here. But yes, that's why I say let us confine to the report. We did look at that. At some point we did look at it. But you always look at, you can have a manager, but there has to be in the police service, there must be support. And in our exploration, you are not going to get this. We realized, I should say, that you're not going to get support of rank and file with an individual from outside, and I would just leave it at that.
Alan, you want to take a little shot at it?
I think the whole quasi-military historical coming into being of the police service, that still pervades today, and it still informs the relationship between officers and so on. So while the ought proposition should be that, yes, a manager ought to be able to do a good job managing the police service, the is proposition is that, that the police service, historically and culturally, they have always had this quasi-military structure, and that is what perhaps is keeping it afloat at the moment.
Just to add to that, with that said, and given what the documents have indicated about the challenges in integrating professionals in various disciplines with uniformed personnel and police officers, what is the committee's, and this is for the benefit of the public and public understanding, recommendation on the way forward? Because obviously there is an implementation issue, because these challenges have not existed for the last 5 years. It's not about PNM or UNC or any particular administration. It's transcended several administrations, and the challenges are getting more acute because of the evolving criminality in Trinidad and Tobago, and across the region by extension, because that also affects our criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. How do we move forward in terms of enabling some sort of structure or facilitating environment where included in the deliverables is some sort of mechanism for measured implementation to deal with these issues moving forward? Because it would be terribly unfortunate, and this is a mandate of the chairman, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Honorable Prime Minister, that this document does not gather dust, that this does not turn into just another talk shop, because this will just lead to more disillusionment of the public. Oh, we've had another report and nothing has come out of it. We've seen no gains in any of the areas outlined as challenges. And if the public can see a timetable and a mechanism by which there has to be implementation through some external, internal, hybrid body and with parliamentary oversight, I think we can start to regain some ground in terms of restoring accountability, restoring public confidence and effectiveness in the police service. But that, to me, is the most critical element in this document moving forward and these discussions moving forward. Because I would hate to see that in a year or 2 years, no progress has been made in terms of this comprehensive document and what it can mean for the transformation of the police service and for the public safety aspect in Trinidad and Tobago.
I don't know if Mr. Philip would want to answer the provocative question by Mr. Lee Hunt and also Mr. Richards' comments.
I think I want to agree with the answers given, because the readings indicate that even when one look internationally at appointment of police commissioners and they look at persons from outside of the police service, the reasons, from all indications, it have not been successful. It have not lived up to the expectation. It is.
Application of the Police Complaints Authority and the law?
Well,
or is that confined only to the regular police officer?
Well, in light of the Police Complaints Authority understanding of the law, of their law and their remit, they have indicated that it applies to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Does that include specifically special reserve police officers as far as they are concerned?
Well, no. Well, according to, from my information, they say no.
Right. So the PCA is taking the position that special reserve officers are not within the remit of their jurisdiction.
Well, this is what I have been saying.
And therefore, there's that to our view, that to my own view, we haven't traversed it as yet, is a serious lacune, which must lacuna, which must be certainly looked at as part of our recommendation. So we'll want to hear a little more about that. Let me just say...
Mr. Miguel seemed to...
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Miguel.
Mr. Chairman, just a matter of explanation. The Special Reserve Police, they are within the jurisdiction of the Police Complaints Authority, where the complaint is a criminal one. But in terms of a disciplinary complaint, a complaint against discipline, then the police service regulation does not really
cover the SRP.
Cover the SRP, because they have their own parent act, the Special Reserve Police Act.
There's still a problem there.
So in the report, there is recommendation there to perhaps adjust the PCA Act so as to close that lacuna.
Full the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and its efficiency and what have you, so they will indeed be here. We began these hearings after we studied your report, and we began these hearings with you to really rehash and to share with us and the public what you found and what you recommended. This would have been your second appearance before us, and over the last few on those two occasions, last and today, we traversed the areas of human resource, a review of the disciplinary process, the question of recruitment and training. We dealt at length today with the governance structure. We dealt last week with the promotion question. So we gave you an opportunity, and we gave ourselves an opportunity and the benefit of hearing viva voce the matters that you raised in your report, at least the key issues. From here on out, we will be calling key stakeholders, including the leadership of the police service and other persons. We are now identifying, or we have begun to identify, who are some of those key stakeholders, including former retired former police officers and others. So we intend to, in satisfaction of the concern of Senator Richards, to proceed apace with this matter, because our focus, our target, our objective is not to rewrite your recommendations, but we as a committee will have to put these recommendations along with a few others and with a few tweaks as this committee sees fit to the larger parliament for the benefit of the government, in particular the Minister of National Security, and we are moving for swift implementation of this. This is the commitment of the Prime Minister when he received your report, when you presented it some time back, and this is the commitment that the government has, and this is the commitment of the Parliament, which mandated this subcommittee to traverse these matters with you. So on behalf of this committee, we would sincerely thank you for your attendance on the last and today's occasion. We would like to congratulate you for a job particularly well done, because we studied, every one of us, the terms of this report, and together we feel it is worthy of high commendation. And we thank you for your work. We thank you for coming today. And we will keep your door ajar for a call if we consider it necessary going forward. If any discrepancy arises, if anyone tries to misconstrue anything that you would have reported, or if we have difficulty understanding anything in here, we reserve the right, and we hope that you'd be kind enough to join us again. But for the moment, we would be only thankful for your attendance on these two occasions. And we, yes, Mr. Professor, sorry.
On behalf of the committee and myself, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your very kind remarks. But I wish to end by making three related comments. One is that I have mentioned the concept and the required practice of representation in these institutions. And I hope it finds traction sooner or later in the public domain, because I was jilted to consider that very deeply because of the preamble in the Constitution. Section C in the preamble states quite clearly that all opportunities must be given to citizens to take as full a part as possible in public institutions. That means what democracy is must be fulfilled as far as possible by civilian participation. And from my view, this is a separate issue from the committee report. I myself find that lack of civilian participation regrettably missing in the kind of democracy we have so far. And I hope one day this concern will find fuller traction to make us a fuller democracy. Thank God that the media has been playing a significant role in carrying public concerns to these institutions. And in that light, I would encourage members of the media to read the full report. The only one who has so far done that quite commendably is Ms. Ria Tate, who has written an comprehensive but cryptic report on that committee's report. And I wish to congratulate her. I don't know if she's here or not, but I wish to congratulate her. The third point is to echo Mr. Richards' urging that this report be handled very briskly. And I would suggest, on behalf of my committee, because we had a special meeting on implementation, and 2 points were made at that meeting, that the people in Parliament, the representatives in both the lower and upper house, search most genuinely for a consensus in these recommendations. Because as I pointed out in my earlier discourse, that Section 53 requires the Parliament to make laws for the good government, peace, and order of the country. So whilst you might have the opposition on one side exercising its constitutional right, and the government, on the other hand, exercising its majority right privileges, I think the question of public interest is now superriding all those issues to the point where we would like to see some recommendations at least take front burner. You don't need Parliament or legislative attention to deal with the human resource issue. You don't need Parliament to deal with the vacation leave issue. You don't need Parliament to deal with staff appraisal issue. And several other issues that require immediate attention should be on track. And whilst you would want to exercise patience in moving from here to the Parliament, I think the public anxiously await some definite action in these respects. These don't require parliamentary approval. These are straight administrative situations that call for urgent attention. So with those few words, I would like to thank you on the committee for your patience and for asking us the very sensible questions you have asked. And so on behalf of my committee and myself, thank you all for accommodating us.
The very fact of these meetings subscribes, supports a view that you carried today. It is part of the process of democratization of it, so that the public can listen, they can understand, and participate, because they can and they do send comments and views to the committee, our secretariat, and they come to us finally for our consideration. So thank you very, very much again. Thank you all members. Thank members of the media for your presence today. And on that, this meeting is called to an end. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. There are light refreshments.